In June 1876, Lakota and Cheyenne warriors handed the United States Army its most famous defeat at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, wiping out George Custer's 7th Cavalry. This stunning victory triggered an immediate military mobilization. The government flooded the region with troops, targeting the native bands as the weather closed in. Thousands of families became hunted fugitives overnight. They now faced a relentless pursuit in sub-zero conditions, where a single summer battle mattered far less than the upcoming winter. By the spring of 1877, the resistance had vanished. Thousands of the same warriors who crushed Custer walked into government agencies and surrendered. We have to determine if these surrenders were the result of battlefield defeats or if the crushing weight of starvation left no other choice. We've set a place for you in the third chair to evaluate the evidence alongside us. Finding the answer requires looking past the tactical movements of soldiers and examining the brutal logistics of life on the plains. General Philip Sheridan orchestrated the military response. He championed winter campaigning, launching strikes when sub-zero temperatures and deep snow immobilized native camps. Since the armies struggled to catch warriors during the summer, they targeted the community's lifelines instead. Columns moved to seize pony herds and burn stored food and teepees. This was a deliberate shift in warfare. By attacking the infrastructure of the civilian community, the military could force the combatants to capitulate. This strategy reached a breaking point on September 9, 1876, when Army troops surprised American Horse's Minneconjou village at Slim Buttes. The soldiers captured the village and decimated its supplies. They seized 200 ponies, burned 35 teepees, and destroyed the community's stock of winter stores. For a family on the plains, the loss of a teepee and cured meat meant facing the winter freeze with no shelter and no calories. At Slim Buttes, the military achieved its goal. The destruction of supplies created an immediate existential threat to the survival of the village families. The troops enforcing this policy suffered too. General George Crook led his men through freezing mud and rain until they outran their supply lines, forcing the soldiers to butcher and eat their own horses to survive the Horsemeat March. One historical perspective views this as a mutual struggle of attrition. In this version, the winter campaign was a test of endurance, where the army simply outlasted their enemy. But consider the view from the third chair. There is a specific distinction between a soldier on a temporary grueling assignment and a family being hunted in their own home. Crook's exhausted men eventually retreated to the safety and supply lines of a fort. The Lakota and Cheyenne bands had no such luxury. While the military endured a miserable deployment, the Lakota and Cheyenne experienced the systematic destruction of their shelter and their homeland. The pressure was constant. In early January 1877, Colonel Nelson Miles led his infantry up the Tongue River in a relentless pursuit of the remaining free bands. On January 8th, the two sides fought the Battle of Wolf Mountain in a sub-zero blizzard. The whiteout conditions were so severe that simply staying outside was a struggle for survival. Crazy Horse's warriors held their ground only long enough for their vulnerable families to flee the fighting. Because the bands were forced to keep moving in the bitter cold, they could never stop to rest or hunt. Hunger became the army's most effective weapon. By the spring of 1877, these so-called Fostil bands were simply trying to stay alive. The pressure forced their leaders to choose between surrender and exile. Sitting Bull and Gall refused to surrender. They sought a path that would keep their people away from the reservation agencies entirely. They decided to cross the Medicine Line into Canada, labeled British Possessions here at the top of the map, to escape the reach of the U.S. military. Sitting Bull sent a defiant message back to the Americans. The land did not belong to them. But reaching safety required a grueling journey through the vast Montana territory. While Exile preserved their freedom, the journey demanded a level of physical endurance that many starving families no longer possessed. For those who could not survive the trek north, the freezing winter finally dictated the end of the war. On May 6, 1877, Crazy Horse led over 1,000 followers into the Red Cloud Agency to give up their arms. They arrived with their teepees in tatters. To survive the final weeks of the winter, the band had been forced to eat their own dogs and horses. Crazy Horse was not defeated on a battlefield. He surrendered because it was the only way to save his community from starving to death in the snow.
the government officially claimed a military victory in the Great Sioux War, framing the surrender as the result of a successful campaign. The records we've explored show a different outcome. This war of attrition ended when the military destroyed the family's ability to endure the winter. Now we turn the question over to you in the third chair. Was this a military defeat or a surrender forced by the absolute lack of food and shelter? Share your interpretation in the comments. We want to hear how you weigh these logistics against the traditional stories of the war. The surrender of Crazy Horse brought a temporary peace, but it also paved the way for a new, spiritual form of resistance. Join us for our next episode as we investigate the rise of the ghost dance.